Hi everybody, and welcome back to class. So this is the second lecture video for class on April 14th. When I closed the first video, I said that we would return an IB in Excel, but I changed my mind, and what we're going to do first is I'm going to walk you through the exercise that you're going to complete today. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a hypothesis testing exercise. And so if you haven't already, you could pause me and go ahead and download this document that's available on Blackboard. And I've started this document for you. So as we discussed in the previous video, the hypothesis testing process begins by providing an overview of the problem that we're going to study. And so I've provided you with a hypothetical scenario. I should point out that these data are not real, so there haven't been these massive increases in crime on Rowan's campus. I'm just using this as a hypothetical. And so in stage one, which I've completed for you, I provide an overview of the problem. So in this scenario, we're saying that as Rowan has grown, the number of recorded crime incidents has as well. So as we can see in figure 1, we've had some pretty steady increases in overall crime, violent crime, and property crime from 2016 to 2019. And in addition to providing you with information about the campus overall, I provide you with information on trends in the dorm rooms, which has also seen crime increases in recent years. All right, so as you see, and I probably would include more information here if this were a real hypothesis testing exercise that I was doing with the police department. But as you can see, this is really succinct, as Cheney notes in the article that I had you read. The overview of the problem should be succinct, but you should provide information, as much information as possible in a succinct way. So we're looking at trends, which is also something that he suggests be included. And I've just described the problem to the extent that when we hit stage 2, which is the stage where we have relevant stakeholders convening to meet, they can look at this information and they can use it to then come up with hypotheses as to why we're seeing crime at the dorms. So this will be clear when you actually read this, but our focus here is going to be trying to address crime at dorm rooms on Rowan's campus. And so in stage 2, what we're saying is that on March 2nd of 2020, we brought relevant stakeholders to Whitney Mansion, also known as Hollybush. We had members from the police department, university president's office, student representatives, representatives from the Senate, community groups, as well as the business sector in and around Rowan's campus. And so we brought these different representatives together to discuss crime at Rowan's dorms and to develop hypotheses. And so what we're saying is that as a result of that meeting, we came up with 6 hypotheses that we could test to see whether we do find support for them in terms of their contribution to crime on Rowan's campus. And so our first hypothesis is that the student dorms are poorly laid out, that there are too many stairwells for crime to take place in or facilitate criminal acts. So we're saying that the layout here is poor, particularly that we've got too many stairwells. So what we're going to analyze here is, when we look at dorm rooms and their layout, do we see dorms that have more stairwells have more crime? Second hypothesis is that the student dorms are poorly laid out and that there are too many entrances and exits, which allows for unrestricted or poorly surveilled access. Right, so this also relates to the layout of the dorms. And again, to test this hypothesis, we could see whether we find a relationship between the number of entrances and exits and crime. Our third hypothesis is that there's poor supervision at the dorms. So here we're saying that there are too few student resident assistants per student residence, so they can't adequately supervise those who are living in the housing. The fourth is that we've got poor supervision as well, but here we're talking about surveillance cameras, particularly that there are too few surveillance cameras per student living at the dorm. Fifth hypothesis is pretty vague, just that the dorm rooms are too old. This is testable, so it's something that we're going to look at, even though we don't have a lot of information here. And then finally, our sixth hypothesis is that the density in some of the dorm rooms is too great. More students in the dorm rooms contribute to higher levels of crime at those dorm rooms. Right, so these are the hypotheses that this working group came up with. And so now it's going to be your job to test these hypotheses with data. And so I've provided you with an example. So I actually test the first hypothesis for you, so you don't have to do that. And so in this section, what I'm doing is I'm stating what the hypothesis is. I'm giving the consumer information on where the data come from. So we're getting this from the Rowan PD, and we're getting crime data from the Rowan PD. And to come up with the number of stairwells per dorm, I looked at dorm blueprints. Right, so I'm expecting that you're going to provide a table with this information. So here I have the dorm rooms listed. I've got the total number of crimes as well as the total number of stairwells. So for each section, or for each hypothesis, I'm going to ask you to include this information. Essentially, you could just copy and paste this whole table in the sections below, and then you could just replace this column with whatever variable you're looking at. Alright, so when we look at this table, we can start to get an idea about whether our hypothesis is going to be supported. So if we look at the first row, we'll see Holly Point Commons. We've got a total of 88 crimes, which is the greatest number of crimes. And we've also got 13 stairwells. So initially looking at this, we might say, all right, there's some support here because we've got the highest crime dorm room also has the highest or greatest number of stairwells. However, if we look at the second dorm room, Chestnut Hall, we've got 25 crimes, which is the second highest, but only 5 stairwells. And in fact, that's a fewer number of stairwells than the other dorms. So our hypothesis is starting to fall apart here at this point. And if we continue looking, we don't really find a clear connection between crime and stairwells per dorm room. And so, although this information is provided in a table, I provide a very succinct interpretation of this table in text. So I say that Table 1 suggests that there's no clear pattern available to support the hypothesis. Although we see that Holly Point does have the greatest number of crimes and stairwells, the second highest, Chestnut, has the lowest number of stairwells. Right, and so although this is a great starting point, another thing we could do is look at a scatter plot. And so I'm going to walk you through how to create scatter plots in Excel as I continue with this lecture. But scatter plots are useful because we can look and see whether we find any correlation between two variables. And so here in this hypothesis, we're looking at the number of reported crimes and we're looking at the number of stairwells. So number of crimes is here on the vertical axis, number of stairwells is on our horizontal axis. And so what we can then do is plot a point where these two variables kind of intersect. So if we take Holly Point Commons here, which is represented by this dot on our scatter plot. Right, we know because there's 88 crimes, so we've plotted 88 crimes here, and there are 13 stairwells. So we've plotted 13 stairwells here. And where those 2 points come together, that's where our dot is going to appear. And so if we were to see a relationship, and this is showing that we really don't find much of a relationship, if we were, we would tend to see our dots increasing in terms of our horizontal axis, so they should progressively be moving to the right, and they should also be increasing vertically as well, so they should be getting higher. And that would be indicative of a correlational relationship. But we're not saying that if we saw that, we wouldn't be saying that stairwells cause crime, but we would say that there does appear to be a relationship between stairwells and reported crimes. But we're not seeing that here. We're not seeing any clear pattern really. And so I very succinctly conclude that this hypothesis is not supported by the data. As shown in this scatter plot, there is no correlation between the number of crimes reported and the number of stairwells. Right, so the test of this hypothesis is only one page. I'm only providing the pertinent information, data that people can look at, a nice visual that people can look at, and that's going to justify my conclusion that we don't find any support for hypothesis 1. And if we don't find support, that's really it. Right? That's kind of the end of that hypothesis. There's really no need to go any further because we're not seeing that relationship that was hypothesized. All right, so that is the first hypothesis, and now I'm going to ask you to do the same thing for hypotheses 2 through 6. And so I've provided you with a list of the hypotheses in the document, and I also tell you which data you should be using to create a scatter plot. So again, for each section you're going to have a table and you're going to have a scatter plot. So I would expect those two things to be included for hypothesis 2, 2 for hypothesis 3, and so on. And you should also have this kind of introductory text, an interpretation of the table that's succinct, as well as your general conclusion. Right? So you should follow this model here for each of your hypotheses. Right, so I'll return to this, but at the end of the exercise, what you're also going to be doing is, based on the hypothesis, whether it's you're finding support or not, you're then going to make recommendations for moving forward and trying to address problems at the dorms. But again, I'll return to that at the end of the lecture. So something to point out, what I've done for each of my figures is I've cross-referenced. So if I click in my text here, if I click figure 1, you'll see that that is cross-referenced with this caption. So I've added a caption to this image, this figure, and I've also cross-referenced it in text. So if you don't remember how to do that, you're going to have to go back and look for the exercise that shows you how to cross-reference and insert captions. I'll give you a hint here. What you're going to do is you're going to go to references, and when you put in your different figures and tables, you can click it and you could click insert caption, and this caption dialog box will pop up, and here you can label your figures and your tables. And so in order to switch between figure and table, all you've got to do is click this drop down menu and switch, and these will automatically update. So in text, these will update. If I move this down and put a figure above this figure 1, this would then become figure 2. Right, so we did learn how to do this, and I'm expecting that you do this in order to get full credit for the assignment. Alright, so I'm going to pose 2 more quiz questions to you before closing out this video and then going into Excel in the third video. The first quiz question is, I want you to come up with a hypothesis that is not listed that might explain why we have crime in our dorm rooms at Rowan. Right? What do you think are some of the causes for crime? And I want you to specifically tell me a hypothesis. So you might want to have a read of what I've come up with and come up with not something that appears in this list, but something similarly explained. Right? So that'll be quiz question number 3. Quiz question number 4. I want you to tell me what date the meeting where we convened stakeholders and decided on hypotheses was held. Right? So what date was this meeting held? And I'm circling it right here in your lecture, in your PowerPoint. Right, so this is the assignment, and now what I'll do is I'll create a video where I'm going to open up the Excel document, I'll explain the data to you, and I'll show you how you can make scatter plots, interpret scatter plots, and insert them into your document. Alright, so I'll see you in the third video.